All right. So let's talk about economic inequality in the world. It's very exciting, I know. Economists believe in trade-offs, right? We believe there's always trade-offs. In one sense, you want people to all be well off and to be able to live a good life. But the more equal, and we've talked about this a little bit before, if we made everybody's income equal, no matter what you did, you had equal income, that would not work very well. And the reason it wouldn't work very well is that there are no incentives for you to work hard. If we just say, look, all right, no matter what you do, everybody gets $5,000 a month, and that's it. That's what you get. Well, why would you work 70 hours a week at a job if you could find another job and work 20 hours a week? Okay, we have to give people incentives if we want people to work differently. The Congress, as part of the Coronavirus CARES Act, added money to the unemployment compensation. So if you lose your job, you get checks from the government. But they added money to those checks. And in fact, they added so much money to those checks that lots of people were getting unemployment checks that were bigger than what they were taking home when they actually worked. Well, now what incentive do I have to go back to work? And Congress was worried about this as they started to renew things. Why would I go back to work if I'm making, if I was making $500 a week when I got laid off, and I'm making $1,000 a week off of unemployment, why do I want to go back to work? Okay? So we know that people respond to incentives and that we need some amount of inequality to create incentives for people. There has to be a reward for you starting a business and working really hard and putting in 100-hour weeks and doing all that. There has to be some reward for you. And if you don't work and you don't work hard and you don't care, that should have a negative outcome to you. And that way we create these incentives. Okay? So we're interested in talking about the distribution of income, how income is spread out across society, the distribution of income. So we've been talking, basically everything we've talked about so far has been allocation of resources. Now we're briefly going to talk about distribution of income. Okay? And this is the way the distribution of income looks in the United States. Actually, it's a couple years ago. This is right out of your book. Okay? The most common income is only about $15,000 a year. And that's because, it's multiple reasons. One, it's because some people have side gigs and that's all they have, right? Their spouse is out working and making a lot of money and they just, are selling Avon on the side or something. Okay? The median income, the middle, is $59,000. So half of Americans' households get less than $59,000 and half get more than $59,000. The average, the mean income is way above that, $83,000. How can the average be way above the median? Well, let's think for a second. The median is just half the people are above and half the people are below. Let's think about Steph Curry. Do we know who Steph Curry is? Plays basketball, yes? Makes $30 million a year. That means he makes $30 million a year. There's about 150 million households in the United States. That means about 20 cents of that $83,000 is just Steph Curry by himself. Okay? And LeBron James is more than 20 cents of that. And there's a whole bunch of other basketball players and football players that are measurable amounts of that $83,000. And Bill Gates, who knows what part of that $83,000 he is. The median is just everybody, one person. You count as one. Here's a person, here's a person, here's a person. But the mean takes into account the fact that you got these incredibly rich people and they skew the mean way up. So we always talk about the median income. When somebody says to you, hey, the income in the United States is blah, they're talking about the median. And that way those really, really rich people don't skew the numbers and make them look good. Okay? The median's the middle. So half of the households in the United States make less than $59,000 a year, and half make more. If we go down here to the bottom, right here, that's about 2%. So to be in the upper 2% of income in the United States, that's $150,000. And $200,000 is about 0.5%. So if you make over $200,000 a year, you're in the top 0.5% or so of all income earners in the United States. Exciting. Okay. So to really measure this, we divide the country up into what are called Quinn Tiles. Quinn means 5, right? The Quinjet is the 5th jet. Quinn Tiles. So we divide the country, we rank everybody in income. We take Bill Gates, the richest person, up at the top, and then we take the poorest person down the bottom, and we have everybody else in between in rank order. So we take the smallest, the poorest 20%, then the next 20%, the middle 20%, the next 20%, and the top 20%. And you can see, for example, that the top 20% has almost half of the, they're out there half of the income. More than half the income. The next 20% has 23% of the income. The middle 20% of Americans only have about 15% of the income. The second from the bottom 20% only has about 8 or 9% of the income. And the lowest 20% has about 3 or 4% of the income. Okay? So it gives you an idea of how unequal income is in the United States. We can also graph this by using those quintiles on something called the Lorenz Curve, and this is the Lorenz Curve. It has the percent of households on the bottom and the percent of income up the side, and then we can draw where the quintiles are. So you have 20% of the population makes 3% of the income. You have another 20% of the population that makes 51% of the income. All right, and we can draw that line. If we have a perfectly even society, then the little black line straight down the middle, that's where we end up. Okay? That green line, the further away it is from the diagonal line in the center, the less even we are. And if you look at the United States and you compare us to Western Europe, Japan, Korea, the developed countries in the world, we're more uneven than the other developed countries. So the United States is less even than most of the European countries and, Japan, Korea, Canada, Australia. But we're more even than the lesser developed countries. So if you look at countries in Central and South America and Africa, Southeast Asia, they have much more uneven incomes. They have a lot more poor people relative to having a few rich people. Okay? And there is no right or wrong here. It's a question of how close you want to be. So we have something called the Gini Ratio. And what we do in the Gini Ratio is we look at the size of this shape. So we have a shape here, right? This curve, and it marks off an area. And the Gini Ratio, we divide the size of that area to the size of the triangle it sits in. So we have this triangle here, right? Triangle. The Gini Ratio is the side of this, watermelon slice in as a percentage of the triangle. Okay? And again, the bigger the Gini Ratio, the more uneven we are. And our Gini Ratio is higher than for most developed countries, and it's getting bigger over time. We're getting more uneven over time. All right? So if you think of the United States as a country that's big middle class, that's kind of false. So if we look back in history, the United States did not have a lot of middle class. This is the percentage of the income in the country that belongs to the top 10%. Okay? And for most of American history, it's 40-45% of all the income in the country belongs to just 10% of the people. Then we have the Great Depression. And the Great Depression equalizes a lot of those really rich incomes. Then we have World War II. And what happens in World War II is you have all these soldiers go off to fight, and these soldiers are mostly lower income to middle income people. Rich people's kids don't go off to war. They figure out a way around it. And it's millions of basic working family kids that are off fighting this war. And if you read their diaries and you read the stuff they wrote during the war and right after the war, they came home and said, we're not going back to the way the world was. We're going to build a better world. We want there to be a better world. So there's books written about this group that calls them the greatest generation, and things that they did. If you don't know, companies like Enterprise Rent-A-Car, that's the USS Enterprise. The guy who started that company served on the USS Enterprise during World War II, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car is named after the ship. Okay, it sounds kind of businessy, but that's not it. It's named after the ship. So we get a large middle class in the United States, but only from the end of World War II, from the mid-1940s until the early 1980s. That's when we have a giant middle class in America. Then starting in the 1980s, and basically this is when we start, cutting taxes for the rich and doing all of this stuff. But you can see that we've been back since the early 80s. We've been just getting more and more and more uneven as a society. Okay? So we had this brief, shiny moment of, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, right? 35 years where we had a huge middle class, and that was the nature of America, and that's changed over the last 40 years. All right, just for fun, what do you have to be in the top 1% of your state? And if you look at Nevada, you have to have $306,000 a year to be in the top 1% of your state. That sounds high, but then California's $438,000. California is a richer state than Nevada is. New York, it's $506,000. Okay? Arkansas is $228,000, and Louisiana is actually higher than us, $339,000. But this is what it takes to be today to be in the top 1% of the income in your state. So to be in the top 1% in Nevada, 306. I'm not there. Okay. On the other end, the U.S. government says that a poverty line for a family of four in the United States is $24,000. So if you make $25,000 a year, the U.S. government says you are not living in poverty. Use you, your spouse, and 2 kids, and you're making $25,000 a year. The federal government does not believe that you are living in poverty if that's your income. Okay? Do you think a family of 4 can live on $25,000 a year? Something to think about.